All right, hi. So we're here at the Outdoor Retailer Show, and I'm with our incredible athlete ambassador, Steph Davis, and we're here at the Evolve booth, one of her sponsors. How are you today?
Great. How are you?
I'm great. It's we're here, we're having fun. There's so much new gear that I actually want, but don't need.
That's the idea. That's why we have the trade show.
I know, exactly. So, first of all, I just read your book. Absolutely amazing. Like, you're as good of a writer as you are an athlete, and writing like that, do you relive all those moments that you went through?
Yeah, that's kind of part of why I write, I think, so much stuff happens in life and everything's always so complicated, but when you sit down and you write a story, it's almost like you've let that story be a story, and you can now move on to the next stories. So that's part of why I do it.
And you're not only physically are you incredible, but mentally, like the ability to do these bold free solos and to be jumping off cliffs. Let's start with your mind. How do you compartmentalize? How do you train for that?
It's a good question. In one way, it's not fast, right? I mean, nothing's fast. Mm-hmm. I've been doing this stuff for over half my life now, and I feel like that's what I've been doing all this time, is training for these things. And so it's not like I train right now for this thing I do tomorrow. It's like the accumulation of all this past. But with that being said, I also do look at things as finite projects. And so what I'll do is I'll look at the physical aspects of what has to happen, because that's usually pretty big, to do these things. And so I'll really train for the physical part. And once I've gone through that, suddenly I have all of this mental confidence because I know I can do what I have to do. I took away some of those unknowns. I'm not just like showing up.
Yeah, you're not just rolling the dice being like, well, I hope it goes well today.
Right, exactly. I'm not just showing up. I'm showing up ready. And to me, that's a huge part of the mental training, is feeling confident and qualified, and I belong there.
Yeah, I was absolutely amazed. Like, not only, is it hard, is it a free solo, but like you're so confident. Like, you're like, well, yeah, the crux is possibly wet today, but that doesn't bother me.
And that's my goal, is to be so ready when I go to do something that's really extreme that there is some leeway for stuff to be not perfect, because otherwise it's kind of falling into that category of like touch and go sort of reckless style, and that's not how I like to do it.
So speaking of that, like after you came off of being a world-class climber and took up the base jumping, which was quite new, what was it? Was that kind of a challenge going back to the beginning and being a beginner again and dealing with the learning curve?
No, I think I always have kind of a beginner's mind in the things I do. For example, with climbing, I've never focused on one style of climbing. So typically, for myself as a climber, I'll push really hard in one area, and then I'll say, oh, now I want to do this other style of climbing. So I'm kind of always doing that. Yeah. And so I think I sort of expect things to be hard or, not always familiar. So I guess, I liked that about when I started jumping. It was very engaging.
And you threw yourself into it 100% jumping every single day. But you also you got hurt early on. What was it about jumping that instead of that taking you out of the game, you just said, okay, it sucks, but it's just part of learning?
I think I was very lucky that in my first year of base jumping, in some ways, not so great. I didn't have parachute skills in the first year because I didn't come from a very solid skydiving background, which is what I would recommend to people who start. But since I didn't have good parachute skills, and that came to bite me in my first year of base jumping because, you need good parachute skills. Yeah. But I was lucky because I got a little hurt twice, basically trying to land my parachute and not being good at it.
and when you say a little hurt, it's broken pelvis.
Well, it's fractured. Yeah, not
sorry.
Screws and stuff, But yeah, it taught me quickly that you don't mess up in this sport, and I feel lucky that I had those relatively minor injuries quickly in the beginning, because I think it saved me later on, because it very immediately made me feel very humble and very aware that you can really mess up in the sport. And then, we don't know what's going to happen, but since that time, almost 10 years later, I've never been hurt again, thankfully. So I think looking back, it was lucky that I had.
No, absolutely. And I just am laughing inside a little bit. Like when you talk about minor injuries, I'm thinking back to Monty Python of like, it's just a flesh wound.
What you gonna do, bleed on me?
That's absolutely amazing. And then along the way, here you are. It's like you're doing these endurance feats, these strength feats, these mental feats. You also have, you went through a process and you chose a vegan lifestyle, which most people don't believe that a high-powered athlete can fuel themselves on that. How did you come to this life?
Well, that's changing a lot. I feel like now, what are we, 2016?
Yeah.
Checking. There's just so much more interest and acceptance in veganism and athleticism. In 2002, when I started eating vegan, people were just dead set against it. And it was like, oh, that will never work. You're crazy. What a mess. And, so it was really hard at that time. But I do feel like that's changing a lot because we see a lot of vegan athletes.
I agree. There's vegan protein powders. There's, frozen foods. There's packaged foods. Yeah. But back when you did it, how did you navigate and figure out what you needed for your body to fuel your activities?
That's a good question. And, it's kind of been a long time since I started. So I actually can't remember what I was eating in the beginning. But I do love to cook. And I've always had this strong feeling that got to eat real food. I don't want to eat refined sugar. I don't want to eat processed food. I don't want to eat chemicals. And so it's almost like that's more my principle than simply to say, oh, I'm going to eat stuff that doesn't have animal products. So I'm always thinking plant-based, whole foods, whole grains, nothing pre-made. I'm doing all the cooking. So it's a really healthy way to eat.
No, absolutely. Like I'm not a vegan, but I do love vegan cooking when it's done well. And you actually have a blog where you share recipes, and it's
because I love cooking, and so I'm just always kind of playing in the kitchen or baking things. Honestly, what I have found is it's much bigger of a challenge trying to bake without refined sugar than it is to cook with vegan ingredients. So for me, that's kind of my biggest challenge, is baking without refined sugar.
Well, to all the brands out there, there's your challenge.
It's tough, actually, because recipes always, they want sugar. And I prefer to use maple syrup as much as possible. I think that's a better type of sweetener. But it's tricky because that's wet, whereas sugar's dry. And so you really have to fiddle a lot with ingredients.
If you say so. It's all Greek to me. But I'd be happy to eat it.
Yeah. No, it's usually good. I mean, sometimes I make something, I'm like, this is terrible, I can't stand it. And then other people still like it, but I'm like, no.
So what's coming up now? Jumping projects, climbing projects. What's anything you can talk about that's on the horizon?
Well, right now I'm really excited about some projects I have in Moab, which is where I live. So I've been traveling a lot the last couple of years and just kind of on the move a lot. And really my big love is the hard crack climbing around the desert. And so there's a couple things I'm working on right now, which is kind of like I'm kind of bringing that focus back to where I live and have some really cool projects out there.
And how do you train for that? Is it just straight out climbing, or does it include like weightlifting, gym, yoga? Well,
usually what I do is it's very seasonal in Moab. And so usually for me, winter is the season for hard crack climbing. So I've been kind of looking forward to winter all year, just gearing up. And then right now it's snowing like crazy. So climbing's not happening. And so I'm just going to the gym, training on a hangboard, and trying to do a lot of cardiovascular fitness because I have noticed a big difference for myself with rock climbing, that if I'm very fit cardiovascularly, things feel easier. And so I'm doing a lot of Nordic skiing and trail running. And so I'm just kind of like biding my time, just training and just waiting for the weather to... I like to train on the routes, is what I prefer.
Well, and I'm looking at your hands. Like I'm so used to seeing like crack climbers just have like these thick and gnarly hands, and you don't. Did you do anything special? Like, how did you accomplish this?
No, it's just my hands.
That's great. There's got to be a benefit on thin cracks that you actually can get in much deeper than some people.
Yeah, well, funny enough, my hands aren't that small. Personally, if I could choose, I would take bigger fingers because most of the really hard cracks in the desert, if your fingers fit in rattly finger size, nice locks, you're psyched. And mine never do because I'm a little too small. But then there's also these like crazy thin cracks where if you're like this tiny girl, you can get in, but I'm too big for that. So I always say I'm like that awkward in between size.
There's no one thing. So what you have to do is search for the right crack.
Exactly.
It's all about the crack.
Or just get good at everything. And
well, I think you've accomplished that. I mean, and also, I mean, I have to say, like, you're one of the most humble people and understated about how good you are. And so thank God for the media to brag about what you do. One last question, which is, you're a veteran of film. You've been in films for many, many years. You've shared your experiences with the world. When I came along with this online film festival, what about it kind of piqued your interest and said, that sounds like a good thing?
Well, I really like online opportunities because, I mean, kind of like everybody, it's fun to have an event and to go out to see it, but the reality is, we all have different schedules and different times we feel like watching movies, and it's just really nice nowadays that you can be at home and say, hey, tonight we're watching a movie, versus like, oh no, it's only playing on this one date, and if I miss it, I miss it. So it's really nice to have that flexibility over the month, and I think that's really cool. But what I also like about it is I feel like, and again, having been in the industry for so long, a lot of times the money dictates what we see. And so a big movie only gets made because the money's there for that. And so there's all this rad stuff going on that doesn't always get the budget because people don't know about it, or it's like a passion project or something. So what I like about the festival is suddenly all those amazing projects that maybe wouldn't have made it before because they didn't have the big budget behind it, now everybody can see that. So that's really cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a part of it.
Thank you for having me.
All right.